What I wanted to ask you, as you mentioned, you need a business model. And most companies forget the business model. And you mentioned Tesla out there. Does Tesla have a business model?
Did they then?
Do they? They still are in the losses. And people think, and today we had an interesting discussion with one of the major owners of Volkswagen.
Yeah.
And he said if the traditional companies had the possibility to do the job, they couldn't do the innovation, but Tesla can't do the production. They will never be successful. That's what he said. As he said, it's, according to you, they're just playing around.
Well, we'll see. He's right in the sense that production, high quality, large volume production is very hard. But I think one has to be careful here. You know, people often look at the buggy whip companies, the buggy producers, and they say, well, why didn't they catch the next wave? Well, they didn't catch the next wave because it wasn't the buggy that was the hard part, it was the internal combustion engine. And they had no expertise in that. So the people who developed the internal combustion engine were the people who won. So right now, the equivalent of the internal combustion engine in an all-electric car is all the electronics in it. So does Volkswagen really have a lead in that?
But do you think Tesla is going to make profit at a certain time?
I'd say it's up. You have to execute like crazy. I don't think it's impossible because, again, if they were competing with the internal combustion engine with Volkswagen, they wouldn't have a chance. But they're not. Volkswagen is like Nokia, as you said. They believe, yeah, we're going to build this robust car and we're going to do it the conventional way and we're going to bludgeon Tesla into the ground. Well, maybe, they might. Tesla might make some big mistakes. But the fight isn't over so much the manufacturing anymore. It's about the experience. So Tesla's trying to go up the value stack like Apple did. Whether he can pull that off or not is a completely, that's a hard thing. But he's going right with Steve Jobs' strategy.
And as you mentioned, Apple, is there, from your point of view, a possibility that Apple is the new Nokia?
Well, I don't know. I used to know Apple very well, but the new Apple is less transparent to me because I don't have enough friends who've left the new Apple. I would just say that Steve Jobs was the most aggressive user of the principles I described than any CEO I've ever known. He was constantly iterating his value propositions, constantly, with the kind of passion and commitment I've never seen outside of SRI, of course. But every week he was learning and trying things out and getting his staff. It was all about innovation for Steve Jobs. There's a joke about Steve Jobs, which is that if you got caught in an elevator with Steve Jobs and he asked you for your value proposition and you couldn't give it, you were fired by the time the elevator door opened. Now, I don't think that story's true, but it doesn't matter. Everybody at Apple knew it. If you don't know your value proposition, don't run into Steve Jobs. And he was driving that kind of mentality throughout the company with a kind of passion and conviction that I think was absolutely unique. So can they keep that going without Steve Jobs? Well, we'll see. But it's not easy. It's not going to be easy.
Questions from your part?
I don't have a question. I have a comment on your...
If it's a short one?
Short,
yeah,
very short. But I don't need, okay, thank you for the micro. I think if I'm looking at Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, I think there is one way of innovation, which is steal early and run fast.
Do what?
Steal early and to steal ideas,
yes,
and run fast.
Yes. Well, steal fast and run, steal ideas and run fast. Well, of course, Steve Jobs, like Musk and all the other innovators, Thomas Edison, they're all stealer of ideas. Of course, they want to go fast. But here's the difference, though. A lot of people steal ideas, but they're not successful. You have to put the ideas into the right equation to produce the product. Yeah, but it's rare. to do that.
Well, I had the pleasure of studying in Stanford, and I drove by Stanford Research Center and the big sign there many, many times while studying there. I always wondered what to do. I figured it out when I read the book about Steve Jobs that he found the mouse there. I'm not sure that after your presentation I understand better what SRI does. You ran it from 98 to 14. Are you saying that the NABC approach is what turned around SRI?
Yes. Those three.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you actually did as opposed to just a theory?
Okay, I didn't say what SRI does, I'm sorry. SRI is basically an innovation enterprise. The goal was to become the premier independent source of high-value innovations. So we work with customers all over the world. We work with government agencies. We work with all kinds of people. But the goal is always to move toward creating innovations of great value. It doesn't mean we didn't do incremental innovations. We did. We did all of those things. But we did research. We created licenses. We formed new ventures of various sorts. And we created new companies. That's what we did. So we did research, but the goal was to monetize. Our business model was to monetize it by creating ventures or licenses of great value. When I went to SRI, as I mentioned, it had been failing, and we introduced these three sets of ideas. Important problems, not interesting ones, because if you're not doing important work, you're not going to get important results. Principle number one. Number two is what I said, having this playbook, and everyone having to do NABC value propositions for everything. And it's an amazing thing when everybody in your company knows that every conversation starts out with a need. Just think about that. Everyone, the HR department, everyone knows that if you're in a meeting and someone starts out with the approach, somebody in the room is going to say, oh, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? We need to focus on the customer first and what we understand about that. That by itself is transformative, but NABC allowed that to happen. So that was a big deal. And the third thing with these value creation forums, and we had them at different levels. We had them for researchers, we had them for major investments, and we had them for venture community. There were different people in each one of these. So let me just give you a tip on the venture one. On the venture one, we ran them all the same way. They were all short presentations based on NABC value propositions, but ultimately, the strategy was different. If you're winning a research contract, that's one thing. It's very different than forming a venture. But as an example, with the venture formation, every 6 weeks, we'd have 7 or so of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley come over and spend a day with us, and we'd present our value propositions to them. Now, imagine how exciting this is to a PhD who's been working for 2 or 3 years to stand up and present their idea to 7 of these folks who were amazing, by the way. What did they do for us? Well, they kept us honest, for one thing, about what's going on in the world, but they also knew where we could get talent, the best talent. They also knew what the competition was doing, so we weren't being fooled. And they put a sense of excitement and feedback into the program you couldn't do. So that's an example of taking this seriously, that it's a learning science. It's about doing everything you can to learn faster. So if you can bring the best people in, that's what you do. That's basically what we did. It's not magic. I was kidding. It's not magic. It's just fundamental things that every other profession has learned how to do. What's your profession? You're an entrepreneur. Okay, so you probably had to learn the frameworks for entrepreneurship yourself, right? Okay, well, God bless you. I had the same problem, okay? Fortunately, I learned how to do this. The joke I make is I worked for RCA for several years. I had the best 2 projects in the company. I had high-definition television and what would have been the first internet company in the world with Citicorp and 9X as my partners. Imagine, a young guy with those 2 projects. The way I tell the story is I was unblemished by success in my RCA career because I didn't know how to innovate. I'm a big company guy. I thought, everything's wonderful. I know what I'm doing. I had no clue. And we became part of SRI, and we had to learn these things. And just about everything that I've wanted to do since has been a success because I've learned those fundamental principles of value creation and entrepreneurship. And My goal at SRI was to give that gift to every SRI employee.
So when you came in, you had that concept and you basically...
Absolutely. I'd already,
Something that within the organization you built, you had that vision before and then
yes.
implemented it. Right?
And we had a cadre of people who we built up over time to be able to teach other people. I did the first workshop for all new employees, and then we would put them through a 2-day workshop, and we would continue that. If they were going through a venture formation, we'd put them through a workshop on that. And very simple frameworks, but why should these people reinvent all the stuff that you and I had to learn the hard way? It's crazy, right?
Well, of course, the best thing in our course here, so of course, when we take away and what can we do, we can't have those kids from give sparring stage to our project managers. Because it's how can you take some of this?
Well, I think the most fundamental thing is asking for a complete value proposition, an ABC. Everything you do, I'm sure as an entrepreneur, everything one way or another answer those 4 questions. I'm sure that's no surprise to you. You always had to answer those questions. So if you make that part of the culture of your enterprise, that one thing is transformative because it starts out with the customer need. That is transformative, right there, just by itself. So one of our employees actually proposed to his wife with an NABC value proposition. I would say that's taking it a little bit too far. I was interested to know what happened when he got to the competition part. That could have been a little awkward, but I'm sure he got through it okay.
He was successful the 7th time.
Exactly. There you go. That's it, right? The rule of 7. There you go.
Further questions? Yes, please.
You spoke briefly about the disruptors.
Yeah.
My name is Sherry Doyon Ditoma from UBS in Vienna. And you spoke briefly about the disruptors and like Uber. And I was just wondering, because to me, Amazon's the biggest disruptor. And they're just sort of displacing so many traditional markets.
Yeah.
And now you really see it with the department stores in America.
Yeah.
That they have such huge debt loads. They have a lot of employees
Yeah.
that don't earn a lot of money, and they all have loans, and that's going to really disrupt the markets if they start to fall and start to crumble.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you see the trends taking place in the pharmaceuticals,
Yes.
and how there's this big merge with CVS and, excuse me, I think it's a proposal with CVS because they're afraid that Amazon is going to Amazonerize the
Yes.
medical markets and so on and products. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that and what your, what can eventually happen, because this can be very, very disruptive in a very negative sense.
Well, it is going to be, retail is going to go through an existential period, right? So we were talking about Procter & Gamble earlier today, and they used to own shelf space in the stores. And they were big and they had lots of muscle, so they could own the shelf space. And if they came out with a new product, they could stick it into the shelf, and all of a sudden it's there, right? It's in 1,000 stores across America. Well, now they're selling over Amazon. So they don't have direct access to the customer anymore. Actually, their customer is Amazon. And so Amazon can put up anything it wants. So my little joke with this afternoon, we were talking about, you want to form a shampoo company? I know a chemist who knows how to make soap. And I understand you know someone who knows fragrance. And Richard knows someone who's really great at web design. And we have another partner who knows how to put together a virtual supply chain from China. And if we pull them together tomorrow morning, by the afternoon, we can have our product up on Amazon and compete with Procter & Gamble. That's the world they're in. It's a real problem for them. Will they come out of it? I don't know. It's an existential threat to them. What was your second example?
The example of no, the disruptors was Uber and then Amazon
Right,
and then
Amazon.
department stores.
Oh, well, so
And
I
then-
answered that.
And just because the department stores have so much debt,
Yeah.
that's the problem. And the employees are unskilled workers, basically. They're working in the shops, and they're the ones that are taking loans to buy homes. And so because we work at a bank, so we're thinking long-term about
If you
paying
go-
the bills.
If you go through parts of America, in downtown areas, you'll see empty store after empty store because they've already taken away 10% of their customers, which is enough to destroy their margin, and they just are going out of business. So yeah, it's going to be one after the other.
What is there to be done? I think this is sort of a question. What is there to be done? Is there anything to be done, or is it just the way it goes? What does it mean for?
Well, that's going to happen. Autonomous vehicles are going to happen. That's 10 to 15 million jobs in America. My approach to it is you have to develop the new opportunities because the old opportunities are going to go away. So if we got better, if we were creating twice as many companies here or in the United States and better companies, then we'd have a much better chance of providing employment for those folks. Absent creating new jobs, I don't know what you do about those folks. It's kind of a bleak picture.
Yes, please, because otherwise.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we discussed, of course, also in the Drucker Forum is this is not happening as a law of nature. There's always a framework, markets, regulations, laws, etc., in which this happens. Mm-hmm. And there are two aspects, because you talk about the need. There's a short-term aspect where people think about or get lured in some way into something. And then there's a long-term element, which is what does this do to the way we are living? So in an aging society, if you lose your local infrastructure, there's a big question about that. And so I think we get back to Drucker in some way, because he asks the bigger questions afterwards. He said, what is really, why are we doing this? And what is the bigger context? And I think it also goes back to the question, you will be in a panel about the role of the state. I think there is a question about how do you structure markets which provide the long-term benefit, where you have a chance, at least, that you get the long-term benefit. Just as a question to be discussed.
Well, it's a really profound observation and question. I'm obviously focusing more on the creation side because my attitude is you can imagine social programs to ameliorate some of the effects of these things. But if you don't create the economic prosperity, you can't afford the social programs. So I'm focusing on the opportunities, which I consider to be endless, and the improvements we can make, which I also see is almost endless, as a piece of that puzzle. But obviously it's not addressing the bigger question, which is a social problem that we're all going to have to address.
Sorry, just one point.
Yeah.
Tesla is paid to a large degree by subsidies.
Yes.
And subsidies are paid by the society,
Yes.
not by the market. I mean,
Of course.
Is paying for this in a way,
Yes.
to disrupt others.
Yes.
So I think it's happening, and these are frameworks which are generally not seen. And I think that's an issue.
Well, they're not seen. You know, I'm on the Singapore version of the board that looks at those things, and I was on President Obama's innovation board, and they get discussed, and everybody knows them. It's the question of what's politically acceptable to do. It's, in both cases, well, I'd say it's easier in Singapore because they're a different form of government, but it was in the time we worked with President Obama, it was really hard to do even what we consider to be pretty obvious things that would be.
It's much easier here.
I'm sure it is. That's because you're here, right? I don't know.
The young man with the glasses.
Thank you. Yeah, I have one question. Assuming you found a very good value proposition, how do you ensure execution, since this is also a very important point? Do you just hire the best people, or did you develop a process that improved your goals?
So there's an important part about our process I didn't mention, which is that when you have super smart people, like we've been meeting here, when they come back every couple weeks or a month, and they're comparing themselves to other people, it raises the bar on all of them to a degree that no manager could imagine. I couldn't imagine what our people do. So we weren't leaving them isolated, they were actually learning. So they actually, the transparency needed to be able to understand what we needed to do for execution was surprisingly obvious. In fact, I almost never wanted to say no, and I rarely had to say no. We had criteria for the different things we did, and if people could meet the criteria, they knew more than likely we were going to support them, and if they didn't, we wouldn't. So I'll give you an example of the criteria. So we're not talking about the human side of this or the organizational side of this, which is a big part of the book. But we had a saying. We asked people to be champions for their projects. We like champion. It's a neutral term. It's not manager, which is, gets people nervous. It's not leader, which gets techies nervous. It's, will you be the champion for this? Everybody can be a champion for their part of the project. And when people were new, they'd come in and they'd say, they'd have an idea, and I'd say, I like this idea. Yeah, we'll come to one of our value creation forums and let's start the process of creating value from it. And I'd say, but there's one question, will you be the champion? And they'd say, well, what does that mean? I said, well, that means you'll drive the value proposition. You'll be the keeper of NABC. You'll just be unrelenting about answering those 4 questions. You'll have at least a partner, because everybody needs a partner, because it's too hard without a partner. I'm sure you've experienced that. And assemble the team in the beginning. You'll learn everything we're going to teach you about value creation. We don't expect you to know it all at first, but we're going to provide that opportunity for you to learn this stuff. You'll persevere. You won't make any excuses, and you'll succeed. That's all. You'll just, no excuses. You'll make it happen. And people in the beginning thought I was kind of joking about this. That's not a reasonable request. But after a while, everyone realized that if you don't have a champion, there's no chance for success. It's one of those fundamentals. So I wasn't asking that just to be kind of cute. It was because it was essential. And because we supported them, they also learned that it's a really fun way to work. It's a really productive way to work. It just, once you work that way, you'll never go back. But everyone had to be a champion for their piece of it, and they knew they were going to be asked for that. So if it came to execution problem, their job was to find somebody or find some way to solve it. We didn't expect them to do it all themselves. We're going to help them, and if they couldn't get that done, then it wasn't going to happen. We just couldn't do it.
What do you think are the key characteristics of an education system which supports the transformation to an innovation economy or innovation society?
Well, Ron studies this professionally. I would say the one thing I look for is innovation ecosystems are about information flow. You want to maximize the information flow. It's all about collecting ideas, synthesizing them, and turning them into value. Anything you do that attenuates the information is bad. Anything you can do to amplify it is good. So why is Silicon Valley so special? The information flow in Silicon Valley is, comparing it to New York City or Boston, it's like a different universe. Every time I go to a restaurant, I run into somebody. What are you doing? Oh, I'm working on autonomous vehicles. Oh, I'm working on 3D printing. Oh, I'm working on... It's really intense. So if government puts in place regulations or things like that that are in the way, it doesn't help. If there isn't access to smart money, we talk about that a little bit, then it's in the way. All those things matter, but to me it's about information flow. Can you get the information you need, basically transparently, without barriers from the government or from other mechanisms in your ecosystem?
But if the education minister of, let's say, Austria, we don't know who it is, as we have no government right now, which is a highly innovative period of time normally, what would you suggest? So when he or she would ask, what should we do? We know there's a big disruptive time. How should we educate our children? What do they need?
Well, I would inevitably say what I said tonight. I work with universities all over America. I'm working with the National Science Foundation because those are all mechanisms to educate the next generation of innovators and give them the skills that many of us have had to learn the hard way. So I love project-based curriculum. My undergraduate school, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and I was a physics major there, they have a project-based curriculum where they send kids abroad, but they don't send them to learn a language, in a bistro in Paris. They send them into the middle of Africa or India or China, and 5 or 6 kids have to solve a real problem. And they teach these concepts to those kids. And when they come back, they're transformed. It's just amazing. Do you know Aalto University in Finland? Do any of you know Aalto? Yeah. So Switzerland said, we're not doing enough of this. So they formed a 4-year project-based curriculum by bringing 3 universities together. Hired a woman entrepreneur to be the president. Tremendous person, tremendous. And they're building a university, and I did a workshop last year with the ex-prime minister and with the students, and they were all over us. I mean, they were all over us. It was just remarkable how smart and outgoing they were and how demanding they were for this knowledge. They were demanding this because they see it on social media all the time, right? They know what's going on. So I think programs like that are transformative. So here was my deal. Let me just back to SRI. Here was my deal if you wanted to come to SRI. See if some of you were interested in this. If you want this, I think SRI is the only place in the world for you. I think you're tremendous. You've got really wonderful capabilities. If you come, I really will help you find a big, important problem, perhaps one that will change the world. And I hope you'll take advantage of all the things we're going to teach you about innovation and value creation. We're going to help you in every way to master every part of that. And I want you to take advantage of that. And if you do those 2 things, I can almost guarantee you that you'll have great success. And you might literally change the world. You'll work with some of the best people in the world. You'll work really hard, but you'll have a lot of fun. And when you go to the retirement home, you'll be able to look back and say you had a good life. I really passionately believe in giving young people these skills because I've seen how transformative it is when they learn how to do this. So that's the little speech I give her or him.
This would be good final marks, but you had one question or comment, final one?
I want to make a comment on what you said and to your question. I think there are 2 excellent ideas about education and developing entrepreneurship, which is key for the Western world against the Asian world. The one thing is, which has been explained by Gary Hamel, to put all the best knowledge in the area of business management know-how from the best professors and to provide them for free on the internet. There are some efforts going on. And the second thing is, there is a famous book from Jim Clifton. Jim Clifton was the CEO, or maybe he is still the CEO of Gallup, of the Global Institute for Market Research. And he wrote a book about how to develop know-how, education, and entrepreneurship, and the book is The Coming Jobs War.
I read that.
So,
He's a
and I
colleague of
think
Richard.
if you want to get the best ideas how to develop such a system, which comes from bottom-up and top-down, I suggest this source. Maybe there are many others, but this is a comment to your question.
Well, you're right. That's a great book. Richard and I worked with him over the internet on these kinds of issues. I would just say one thing, though. If all of education is experiential, if it's not experiential, it's not very effective. And the kind of things we're talking about here, whether it's in your company or with little kids who are 3 years old, if the experiential part of it is missing, it doesn't work. So, yeah, Jim's book is brilliant, but it still needs this other part.
It's already 5 years old, but it's not received. Right.
Well, of course not. None of this has been achieved.
Well,
Listen,
Kurt,
yeah.
thank you very much
Yeah,
for your
thank you.
insights.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you.